Today I'm going to be taking a look at the JONSBO N3. I previously did a video on the N2, which is an almost identical case. A couple differences, the fans are different and it only holds 5 drives instead of 8. And this is the K7, which for some reason has 8 drives. This is another case I reviewed recently, an 8-bay NAS. I thought it was okay. It's not great. The N3 is brand new. I just bought it from AliExpress, so I got it kind of ahead of time because you can pre-order it on Newegg right now in the US. However, if you buy it direct from JONSBO on AliExpress, you get, I got it a couple weeks early. So if you really want it, you can pay an extra $50 or so and get it a little early, or you can just wait for it to become available on Newegg. I'm sure they'll have better returns and whatnot, so you may want to wait for that anyway. If you're looking to choose between the two of these, this case actually costs more. The only advantage this case has over the N3 is that this supports an MATX motherboard. So if you're really desperate for PCI Express slots, you'll have to go for this one because there really aren't many choices for MATX motherboard 8-bay NAS enclosures. So you're just not going to find anything else beyond this, at least at a reasonable price. If you really need MATX, go with this one. But honestly, I would probably just try to do everything I can to get down to ITX size motherboards just to use the N3, because I do think it is a genuinely good case and it's just much better design over this one. The hot swap bays on this are particularly bad in that they restrict a lot of airflow. You can't really see it, but the backplane on this also blocks a lot of airflow. So the drive cooling on this is not great. It won't entirely cook your drives unless you're in a really hot environment. Both of these enclosures are limited to 92mm fans, although this one technically ships with 100mm fans. 100mm fans are basically just made up for this one case. They don't really exist anywhere else. I don't know why JONSBO did that. They're 100mm. 92mm fans just don't move a lot of air. You're really pushing it with 8 drives and 92mm fans. The JONSBO case is much more airflow optimized. I suspect once I film this intro and then build something in it and do some testing, I suspect this one's going to easily beat it for thermals. I'm not doing like super advanced technical measurements or anything, but I'm basically just going to see if the drives overheat. And by overheat, I mean get over 40 degrees under normal conditions, which they shouldn't. The front of this one just opens up with a nice little magnetic latch, and then you can just pull the drives out, and yeah, easy, both hot swappable. Both support SAS drives and SATA drives. The JONSBO N3 also has USB-C on the front. This is only USB Type A. It also has an audio connector still. I have no idea why they put audio connectors on their NAS cases. On the back of the case, spot for your I/O shield. There's pass-through for power to the power supply. This case uses an SFX power supply, which I prefer over Flex ATX power supplies like the K7. Flex ATX power supplies are the ones that are usually in one-use servers. They are rather hard to track down in good quality unless you're pulling them from a server. And when you do pull them from a server, they're usually really loud because they're server power supplies, so they're just really loud. Trying to track down like a decently priced, good quality one can be difficult. There's a pretty big market for the SFX power supplies with small form factor builds, so you can get like super high wattage ones if you want to put a GPU in here, all that kind of stuff. You can track those down a lot easier, in my opinion. I think it's just a better choice for a power supply. Up top, there's space for 2 80mm fans. These are optional. I would recommend them if you're using anything beyond just a really simple motherboard. If you're using a low power NAS board, you probably don't need any airflow, any active cooling. If you're running any kind of GPU or anything, or doing a lot of compute with a VM system, I would highly recommend installing the fans. You know, you can pick up a couple of Noctuas for it. This case does support full height cards, which is a nice bonus. That's kind of like a side effect of this thing just being really tall. So like you get space for fans and you get space for full height cards, which is nice as long as you have the height space for wherever you're putting it. The main fans are 100mm, which is bizarre. I mean, 100mm just doesn't exist anywhere. I don't know why they picked 100mm. What is with JONSBO and their fans? It's like, I feel like the N2 was let down by the fact that you couldn't put a normal 25mm thick 120mm fan in it, and this one has these bizarre ass fans. I don't know. they support a normal 90 millimeter fan. 90, 92 millimeter, they're the same thing. I think in the future I'll try to say 90 millimeter because it more closely matches like 120 and 80 and stuff. I don't know how the industry got to the point where they were making 92 and 90 millimeter fans and they mean the same thing. But I just think 90 makes more sense, even though I constantly alternate between the two. Couple thumb screws, you can just take them right out and you have access to the backplane. Here are the fans. They're branded JONSBO and they come with fan guards on them and they have a decent number of blades, so they're probably decently high static pressure. They aren't PWM fans, they're only 3-pin fans. Again, for some reason, yeah, they're seemingly just 92 millimeter fans with like a bulkier outer frame and like maybe a little bit bigger blades. Yeah, this is a bizarre design choice. I have no idea why they did this. Right away when people on Reddit saw that this thing was coming, that was the first thing that stood out to everyone. Like, why are they doing 100 millimeter fans? They're impossible to get. They don't exist. And 90 millimeter fans are okay, like they're, you know, you can get good quality ones, you can get ones from Noctua and stuff, but the catch with them is that they usually aren't very high speed or really loud like server fans, so you just can't get a good balance where you can keep 8 hard drives cool. We'll see how it goes in testing, but I've plugged these in. They seem to move a decent amount of air and they weren't particularly loud, so I mean there's hope. We'll see. Long term, even if they're good fans, long term I'm just concerned that you won't be able to find a replacement for them, and then you replace them with 90 millimeter fans that are potentially worse. It's a minor gripe because chances are you won't have any issues or anything, but still, tucked inside is the backplane. I really like this design. You can tell that there's a lot of airflow space because they've just made the PCB really short. That's a major problem that a lot of backplanes have, where they just have no space for air to go through. This backplane, although it's solid, a lot of backplanes have cutouts for air. The top section provides enough clearance to really, I mean, I can stick my whole hand in there almost. It really provides a lot of airflow, and I think that'll really help because a lot of the airflow down here, when there are cutouts, it's blocked by all the cabling. So you're not going to get much airflow just like weaving its way through. This has a really clear opening for cooling the drives. So I'm expecting this to perform quite well in drive cooling. It does have 2 fan connectors, so you can plug fans directly into it. I assume they run full speed just like the N2, but I mean, I'll plug them in. I'm 99% sure they're going to be full speed. We have a little interface cable. This runs up to light up all the LEDs on the front, and it takes 8 serial ATA cables, which is both good and bad. It might be easier for you to connect to things because ITX boards these days don't usually have 8 serial ATA ports, so you're not going to really be able to just plug it into the motherboard. There are a couple exceptions. I'll put links into those because there are some N series chips they've made motherboards for that have 12 or 10 or 8 serial ATA ports. They're just provided by onboard controllers, so they're not particularly great, but they are cheap, and you can get a whole motherboard for like $150 with all the SATA controller stuff you need. I think most people are going to run this with an HBA. There's power connectors on this. It's kind of baffling to me because there's 2 Molex connectors on it, which is expected. You can run about 4 drives off a Molex connector. They're pretty high current capable. That's really typical for backplanes to run off Molex connectors. But for some reason, they have a single SATA connector here. There's no instructions in the manual that tell you how to wire this up. I think that's really strange, and I have concern that people will just plug in a single SATA cable and potentially melt wires trying to run 8 hard drives off it. The manual shows just basic setup and where to route cables. It doesn't say anything about this, so I'm gonna stick with 2 Molex connectors because I think that's what you're supposed to plug in, and it simplifies the cabling. The fans, although 25 millimeters thick instead of the thinner ones that were used in the N2, there is sufficient clearance here for cabling, so I think you're probably going to be fine. For those of you wondering, yes, the top is still hex keys. I have no idea why, and it's just inconvenient. And this time, they don't even have the little foam holder, so you can't even just keep the stupid hex key with it. No idea why they did that. No idea. I don't know why they did it in the first place, let alone why they did it again. Once you've got those ridiculous hex screws off, you can just pull the top right off, There's vents on both the sides and the front of the case. You can see there's a bunch of holes here. The holes cut out into the metal. They're just very small, so you're really not going to get much airflow out the front. Not super important because the side vents are quite large. You can see here. Every single opening has a mesh so that when you pull air out, it sucks any dust in through the meshed front and side panels, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with either way. Personally, I think these restrict way too much air. I'm not going to keep this case because I just don't need an 8-bay NAS. I still have the N2. Oddly enough, with the N2, I keep that in my fire safe and just pull it out and replicate the true NAS and then put it back into the fire safe. It just happens to be my fire safe is kind of large, so that just worked out well. I would definitely recommend just ripping out the mesh. The front panel has it as well, you can see, and this just comes right off. You can just rip it off. I'm not going to do that in testing today because, like I said, I'm going to just resell this, so you might get a bit better performance if you rip it out. Internally, there's just a bunch of connections for your front panel headers. You have the cable running up for the LEDs, and then you have the pass-through for the power connector. The layout is that you mount the power supply here, and it just takes up this spot, and then you have your ITX board, and that's it. There's mounting points for 2.5-inch drives if you want. It says it only supports 1, but it looks like physically there's like screw holes for 2. So I imagine you can put 2 in there. That's a little overkill because now you're like really pushing it for serial ATA ports with an ITX board. In terms of hard drives, this is what I'm going to be using today. This is a 3 terabyte Seagate Exos drive. These things are incredibly hot. They're terrible. They die a lot. Yeah, I don't recommend ever buying these, but I have 8 of them, so they should be kind of a worst case scenario in terms of heat output. I can install a couple of the 80mm fans in the top. These are Noctua Redux fans. Don't forget, you're probably going to need a fan splitter. Most ITX boards don't have a lot of fan ports, so make sure you have a splitter. I've got a very overkill 16 drive capable SAS controller. You don't need one like this. You can get one that has only 1 port on it if you have 4 ports on your motherboard. Got a couple SFF 8087 cables to 4 serial ATA cables. This will also transfer SAS if your Backplane supports it, which it does. As for power supply, I'm going to use the Corsair SF600. This is the platinum version. It's very efficient. Comes with nice braided cables and all that. They're not cheap. It's a little overkill. You don't need 600 watts for something like this. It's not going to pull much power. All the power is going to be in the hard drives, and even then it'll be just startup current. However, if you're running a multi-core CPU, like you could put like a 16-core CPU in here if you want. This is just what I have in terms of SFX power supplies. In terms of motherboards, I have a B550 motherboard here from Gigabyte. It was like $130 used on Amazon warehouse. And this comes with everything you'd need and a bit more. So it's got 2.5 gig LAN, which is very useful. Audio, which you'll never use. Wi-Fi, which you'll probably never use. A whole bunch of USB ports that you'll probably never use. And even USB-C. It actually does have 4 serial ATA connectors on it, so you can get the smaller card if you want. It has 2 RAM slots. I just have some Corsair memory in there, random sticks of DDR4. This particular board does support 2 M.2 drives, which is really nice, although the one at the bottom won't get much cooling. Yeah, that'll allow you to do redundant booting if you want to, or have like a VM storage drive. Processor I'm using is, I believe this one is a 5650 GE Pro, which is an APU like the regular G series. The E means it's low power. The Pro means it supports ECC, although I'm not going to bother pulling out some sticks of ECC memory today. This board does support ECC memory. You got to check on AMD boards. They don't all support it. This is the B550i Aorus Pro AX, in case you're wondering. You can go a lot cheaper than this. You can get an A520 board. I think I found the cheapest one was like $120 at time of filming. If you're looking on Amazon in the US, look at the used prices for stuff. This thing was only 10 bucks more and is way better than the A520 board. One of my favorite features on any board, I swear, is like a main buying point now, is that it's got the built-in IO shield. I swear I need that now. I love it. Yeah, I'm just using the stock cooler on this. It doesn't need anything fancy. Do have a lot of vertical height if you want to put in a real cooler. As you could see earlier when I was showing off the drive, the mechanism this uses to mount drives are these little grommets, and there's a little pull rubber thing on the front, a silicone rubber thing, and you just slide these in and they click in, and that's it. Very simple. Personally, I don't think the design is great. There's definitely advantages to it. One, it's cheap, which is obviously a factor. And two, it's really simple to put together. You just put the 4 screws in. It's also really good for airflow. A lot of caddies block a lot of airflow, like the ones in the A7. This doesn't block anything. In the future, I think they could do a better job if they just took some flat steel and just made a flat strip here, bent it, and made basically a U-shaped piece. You could even have it come out like this, like just straight out, over and down. And then they could fold this section of the metal to make it really rigid, to make it into a tube. I think that would be really low cost and a much better, more reliable mechanism to get the drives out, because they obviously don't have too much confidence in it, because both the N2 and this one come with spare silicone pull things. So I think they're expecting these to break at some point if you do a lot of drive swapping. And I think just a metal, just like a kind of rigid bar. This part doesn't need to be rigid. It's screwed in. It can just be flat metal, but you just bend this piece into a tube and you get like a really rigid pull handle on it. And I think they could do that really cheaply. There we go. All the drives are installed. And yes, I put one on upside down. There we go. That's it. I've finished the build, and as you can see, there's a different motherboard installed. That's because even though I use Amazon Warehouse all the time and have really good luck with it, where you just get really good deals on an open box motherboard or whatever, I've actually gone through 2 gigabyte boards that were LGA 1700 MATX boards, both DOA. Same issue. They won't power on, but they'll do the Q flash thing. And then there's the ITX board I was going to use. That one had just random hardware lockups. Like, I don't know what on it was dying, but something on it just would not work. It wouldn't even boot into Linux. If it booted into FreeBSD, like if I managed to get TrueNAS to boot, it would just lock up at random. And I moved all the hardware over, same RAM, same CPU, all that stuff, and works perfectly on other motherboards. So I just got 3, they were all gigabyte, 3 dead boards in a row. So I ordered a much cheaper A520 board, which I'll just use for my generic testing anyway. This board is my test bench, so I just pulled that out. It's an Intel board. I used that for a while. Temperatures, good. I won't say they're amazing, but definitely in a normal room, say 25 degrees C, I was getting low to mid 30s on all the drives. Remember, these are really hot drives. Perfectly good in a hot room. When it got up to like 30 during midday here, yeah, I got up to about 40 degrees, which I think is, you know, that's like the limit to where like I like. If it gets up to 45, I'm freaking out. So like 40, that's okay. I know they're designed to run hotter, but I hate that. Tested out, fitting one of the 90 millimeter fans. You can see it's just slightly smaller than the regular one, but the stock fans seem to work pretty good. I had them running full speed plugged into the motherboard or into the backplane. Worked fine, and I really didn't even notice them, but then again, I have a server in here, so some people are more sensitive than others. In terms of building, there's plenty of space here for a fan for an HBA. I was just testing that out to see if it would fit. Overall, it kept the upper area really cool, even though obviously this air cooler is installed in the completely wrong way. That's just because that's how I have it set up on my test bench and I didn't want to remount it. I'd rather test a poor cooling solution than a really good one in this to really get a feel for how hot it gets into this upper compartment. These fans kept it cool. No problems whatsoever. Power supply installation, very good, except for the fact that there's 2 screws way down here and they're quite difficult to reach. So you either need to use an extremely long bit. I really like this WIA one. Or another good recommendation is the Noctua screwdrivers. Cable management in here was actually really good. I know it looks terrible because I just crammed everything in. That's just because, you know, I'm taking this apart in 5 minutes. It actually went together really smoothly. There's lots of good spots for cable routing. There's holes cut out in a few different spots. Plus, under the motherboard tray, you can just hide a whole bunch of cables. A couple minor nitpicks. I would like to see either drop the audio connector completely or at least make it so that you can disconnect it. Then you don't have to deal with hiding it under the motherboard. Overall, I definitely give the case a recommendation. The only complaints I have are really minor nitpicks because, like I said, it's a good case. Can't really fault it for much, but there's just like tiny things I'd like to see them change. Lose the mesh, which you can do if you buy it. You can just rip all the mesh out. Lose the 100mm fans, change them to something bigger. I don't care if you have to make it a little wider or whatever. Give us 120s, ideally with 8 drives. 25mm thick 120s, please. Yeah, overall, definitely recommended.